right? Like, I don't hate mock drafts. I hate them with a passion, and not because of what they are, but because of what people do with them. You know, it's like skinny jeans. In theory, I don't hate the concept of skinny jeans. What I don't like is when Joe Miller decides that he needs to wear. It's like, you're a full-sized adult grown male. You're not wispy. You don't look French. I don't need you. Like, you're the guy who's decided to make this, like, this is your application of it. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Rock Pile Report podcast. I'm your host, Bill, season ticket holder Drew Gear. That's my producer, Chris Kruger. And I want to talk about learning lessons. More importantly, mocking. I guess we deserve to be laughed at when we don't learn lessons, right? Like,
yes, like from your father, because you're right now, as people are watching this, Drew's in Mexico looking for his real dad.
I started the premise of tonight's show as I was kind of looking at it conceptually. Something happened. I was in the middle of making fish tacos. Okay. I was making, the other day, I was making fish tacos. It was Cinco de Mayo. And I'm frying them in a fry pot outside with a burner, and it's a whole thing, but you do it outdoors, right? Because I'm not a savage. I don't want my whole house to smell like fish. So my kids are out playing in the yard, you know, whatever. My 5-year-old's a pretty smart kid, and they're playing and they're doing whatever, minding their own business. They're watching me cook. They understand. Dad grills, dad cook. One of the number one rules: don't touch anything that you see dad working with out here, because it'll probably hurt you. And they, whether it's sharp, whether it's hot, and they've forever, this has never come up as an issue before. So then multiple times they stop their playing to come ask me, what are you doing? And so I just tell them, hey, I'm here. See this oil? It's really hot, and I'm using it to cook this fish. That way we can cook it quickly and go have fish tacos for dinner. I'm almost done. And all of a sudden, Chris, you know how something moves real quick out of your periph and you like knee jerk towards it?
Yeah.
It's like a fight or flight instinct kicks in. And I see something out of my periph, and I turn and I look at Jack, and his eyes are about the size of dinner plates, and he's holding his own hand, looking at it and looking at me with these, he had reached out. It's exactly what I thought I had just seen. Reached out apropos of nothing, and with just an open hand, just touched the fry pot. And then preceded at least 20 minutes of hysterical crying, running his hand underwater at the sink and the thing. And I'm still dumbfounded because I'm like, kid, you know this lesson. And yet here you are learning it again in the worst way possible. My heart goes out to the kid, Chris. You've burned your hands before, right?
Yeah, I was just telling you today. I cut my pinky. And I stabbed my thumb with ice. I look at that. You can see right through my glass, clear ice. I put water in a cooler and freeze it, and then I pulled it out and I put my thumb on like a sharp piece, and I literally got stabbed by frozen water today.
Sounds, when you say it like that, it sounds like the dumbest injury on earth.
Yeah, and right before we press record, I picked this up, and it just spilled over the front of my desk.
He literally, I asked him, because he picked his drink up, and now that his glass is all wet, his coaster's wet, the coaster stuck to his glass, and I saw that moment of fear on his face where he was like, oh my God, is this spilling? And I go, what would you have done if you had spilled a second consecutive cocktail? And his answer was, I just quit on today. I'm done. I'm finished with everything.
No drinking.
No drinking, straight to bed. But so from this, you know, Dave Gear used to call those 2x4 lessons. You learn some the easy way, and you learn some the hard way, in which you were wrong. Not just like, oh man, I made a mistake. You were wrong, and you were quickly proven wrong, and you saw the error of your way. I think we all need a little bit of that as it pertains to mock drafts, right? Like, we'd all need a little bit of burning our hand on the hot fry pot if we're going to be the types of people who make mock drafts and try to crow about them. Right? Like, I don't hate mock drafts. I hate them with a passion. And not because of what they are, but because of what people do with them. You know, it's like skinny jeans. In theory, I don't hate the concept of skinny jeans. What I don't like is when Joe Miller decides that he needs to wear. It's like, you're a full-sized adult grown male. You're not wispy. You don't look French. I don't need you. Like, you're the guy who's decided to make this, like, this is your application of it. And guys, I'm not throwing shade. He does this shamelessly. If you ask him about it, he will just tell you, I look good in them. To which, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, I guess. Either way.
Technically, Joe Miller does classify as a rock star because he has toured before as a guitarist. So he can play that card for as long as he lives.
So it's not so much that I hate the thing. I hate people's application of the thing. And like don't get me wrong. Like, what I hear, right? All the people like, it's creative and it's just us having fun with this idea. I went to school for journalism. I love creativity. I love fantasy, right? You people are creating fantasy. But then somehow, somewhere along the way every year, once you get closer to the draft, you realize that there's a certain segment of the population who has deluded themselves into believing that all of these fantasy mock drafts that we've come up with are closer to reality.
Like
than they
Jeremy and
actually are.
Joe from WGR.
Yes. Let's.
This isn't fantasy football, guys.
I'll tell you what, that day, we're going to get a lot of mileage on this podcast out of that one afternoon.
Dude, they opened Embedded with it. The first episode of Embedded. Those savages at One Bills Drive.
I'll say this. Here's the difference between fantasy football and mock drafts. Fantasy football has some reality to it because there's provable winners and losers. Okay? In mock drafts, everybody just plays intellectual grab ass with each other about the concept of who's good based on third or maybe even fourth hand information that they're getting from their pundit of choice, right? And then whether it's someone with a national platform, a local podcaster, and then they take it and turn it into this thing that they then have like, they become insufferable about it. Oh, well, in my mock draft, I mocked. You're an idiot. And so is everybody who's participating in this with you. But you're not an idiot because you're doing a mock draft. You're an idiot because you believe in it. Like, that's the problem. And that's where this all gets lost. And what I don't like about it is there's no provable winner or loser in this, right? Generally speaking. When they're wrong, the person who's the most wrong doesn't get handed a toilet bowl trophy. There's no group chat of people like there is in fantasy football dunking on them for their failures. Just shrugs and everybody hiding behind the concept of this is just a thought exercise. Oh, except for those 3 times I was spot on. I want the ability to victory lap and crow to people who I don't know on social media about it. I hate it. I hate what people do with it. Like, life without actual risk or the consequence of maybe having something to lose. Why are you doing it at all then? From that thought process is where mocking the mocks came from. We used to do this, Chris, and then we got old and tired, and I just stopped wanting to do math. That's basically what it boils down to. I started doing more math at work, realized I didn't want to do math at work and at home, and just shut that part of my brain off.
At least you have work. I'm this close to going out collecting bottles and cans.
Guys, if you see Chris panhandling anytime soon, here's what I need you to do. I need you to find all of the spitters that you can locate and just bring them to him.
I did interview somewhere and they offered me $1 more than minimum wage to help stop fentanyl from entering the country. Yeah. Heard that right.
That doesn't give me a whole lot of hope for the future of anybody. But so from this, the Mocking the Mocks exercise, where I've curated mock drafts of people brave enough to forward them to the internet, compared them to the actual draft, and scored them like golf. And so in front of me, Chris, how many pundits do we have here? I think 6? 7?
Yeah.
7, 8, actually, now that I'm looking at this. I believe the number
You
is
got
8.
I don't know who's in category B, but you have Brugler, Collinsworth, friend of the show, Brett Coleman, Lance Zierlein, Jordan Reed from ESPN, Peter Schrager.
Ben Solak.
Ben Solak. Schrager only does one mock draft.
Yep. And all of these people throughout their course of their punditry, Brett Coleman, obviously host of Bootleg Football, Chris Collinsworth, the most annoying broadcaster of all time, Dane Brugler, author of The Beast, and
Athletic.
The Athletic, and just draft guy. He's like a draft guy's draft guy. Daniel Jeremiah, another guy who's talked about in draft circles as being very knowledgeable about what he speaks. And I said, okay, we're going to take this and we're going to score these and we're going to figure out what's what. We're going to see who knows what. So just to explain the methodology to you, now obviously you're watching this, there's been some post-production. Chris is going to show you just a snapshot of the chart from a high level. The scores at the bottom that you're seeing are tabulated by basically saying if you got the pick right in terms of the round and the player, your score would be 0.
Team doesn't matter.
Team doesn't matter. This is agnostic. This is just the player. And that's why I think this is interesting, is because you've been doing this with player fits in mind. And this is where those teams actually fell. And this is the teams that said, no, I'm not willing to wait. Because they, like a perfect example, the Browns and the Jaguars had different needs. I guess you could argue Browns fans are pretty pissed they didn't draft Travis Hunter. But at the same time, everyone across the board said he would go number 2, and every single pundit who did a mock draft, he was the second pick in the draft. In fact, all of the top 3 across all of the mock drafts we looked at were the same, which tells you that team, people go, oh, well, it's not right if you don't get into the minutia and understand the team that's picking. No, I don't have to, because we want this to be relative across the entire sample size. For those of you who understand what that is and build samples and things like that, you know why this is important. And when I did it, when this started a couple years ago when we used to do it, it was all just to punch down and make fun of people. Just to be able to be like, hey, remember Doug Farrar blocked us because we made fun of him because he lost like 3 years in a row?
Yes.
And we pointed it out, and we pointed it out like 4 or 5 times on Twitter, and he finally just blocked us for it. Talking to some people who know Doug personally, apparently that's just his thing. If you catch him on the wrong day, he's a real pill, which is hilarious because you're an adult. But so anyways, I took a look across the final mock drafts for each of these individuals, and Chris will have some on-screen graphics as I talk through some of these things for you. But as much as this started off just being schadenfreude for the purpose of just making fun of these guys, and then using that as a way to make fun of all the people at our level who participated and thought they knew a damn thing, I actually learned some things. One of the things I learned is that Shedeur Sanders might be the most devastating thing to happen in terms of draft prognostication of all time. I don't know that there's ever been more disparity in terms of where a player was by pundits, even the knowledgeable ones, where he was perceived to go and where he landed. I think it's worth noting Dane Brugler, and Brett Coleman, Chris, the only 2 national pundits I looked at who didn't have Shedeur Sanders with the first round grade. And yet even they had him on day 2. So he ended up going at what, pick 144?
Yeah, 5th round, 144.
I was say, because I have it here on my table. I've got all kinds of notes and just highlights and things. And it's funny when you see the damage that did to some people's scores, to the degree that I had to score it with 2 separate categories. Total with Shedeur Sanders included, and then total without, just to see if I could boil it down to a real winner and a real loser. Because Shedeur Sanders, his fall, might have been one of the most epic things of all time.
The best was the shot of the Browns' war room when he got drafted. It looked like whoever was behind the camera also had a gun on every one of them. Act happy, look happy, like you like this pick. It seemed like that pick was forced by Haslam.
Well, and so one of the things I find interesting in the sense that Brett Coleman did not prognosticate this guy to go in the first round, is that he had a tweet on April 29th in the aftermath of the draft. And I think it sums up a lot of what we just watched take place. Because again, this is unprecedented to the point that I think Mel Kiper really did show his ass. And I think that it's going to be difficult for them to consider putting him on the, I mean, he'll probably make the panel next year. But let's not pretend there won't be conversations had behind closed doors about, can we trust that Mel's not going to hijack the entire production?
Why do you think ESPN hired Matt Miller from Bleacher Report?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Somebody's not going to be around that much longer.
There's an end.
Somebody's going to be, you'll see it a lot in sports media, somebody being forced into retirement. I think like with ESPN, I think of Tom Jackson, who was with Berman on NFL Primetime, kind of forced into retirement. You'd see that with Mel Kiper for next year. He already should have retired because of his Jimmy Clausen's going to be a star. Who does he play for?
Oh my God. The fact that the Jimmy Clausen love was tough. Like that's a tough one, right? So on April 29th, Breck had this to say, and I don't even think, Chris, 1:04 a.m. on April 29th. What was day one of the draft? Do you have the draft day up in front of you?
Let me pull up a calendar.
Because this is what he had to say. After some thought.
It was the day after his 24th, the day after your birthday, you dumbass.
I don't know. Fucking dude, if it happens more than 48 hours ago, trust that I've already forgotten it. You know, you have to have a short memory when you walk around looking like I do. From Brett Coleman, after some thought, I think part of the issue for the Shedeur Sanders camp is they didn't hire an agent, you know? And this plays into, I just wanted I'm going to sidebar. Again, we're trying to bring reason to some of what we learned studying this scoring of the mock draft. And again, when you're talking about the most damaging thing to ever happen to this process, you want to kind of do an exorcism in there. What do they call it? Not an exorcism, but a...
exercise?
No, you exhume the whole thing. Even though it's over, you want to exhume the body and look at it and go, okay, how did this happen? Brett Coleman, I think part of the issue is that Shedeur Sanders, they didn't hire an agent. An agent's job is to give the client an accurate range of where they're projected to go so they know how to navigate the process. Shedeur approached the process, by all accounts, like a lock for the top 5 because that's what the Sanders family honestly thought he was going to be. And unfortunately, they didn't have anyone in their circle willing to tell them otherwise. If he went into the process knowing that teams had day 2 grades on him, who knows? He might have done things differently, and that's why NFL agents are important. I think there's a lot of merit to that. You know, you can say what you want about Shedeur Sanders. You know, maybe it was character assassination when they talked about him tanking the pre-draft interviews, or where they talked about his refusal to participate at the combine, or all of these things. If you had gotten a letter from the NFL board recommendation board saying where they thought you would go, like a lot of rookies do, and then also talk to an agent who can back channel on your behalf and say, hey, man, I think you're going to have to go into these meetings and kowtow a little bit. You're going to have to you have to be able to show these guys that you can be humble. Because let's say some owners do want to collude against you, right? Chris, maybe there's some stodgy, old Caucasian guys who want to say, hey, this Shedeur Sanders, we don't want him anywhere near our team because we don't like his attitude.
I feel like Buffalo's doing the same thing to me in my job search.
They're taking one look at your hair and being like, don't bring that in here. Look at this guy.
You can't look at my hair when you see my resume. There's no second attachment of a photo.
They smell the, you know what they do? They smell the Aquanet on it. So the idea is, if an agent could have gone to Shedeur Sanders and said, hey, man, there is a lot of pushback against your image that you've projected over the last 2 years and some of the baggage that you might not even be able to control. So what you need to do is go into these meetings and help these GMs understand that you are a hard worker and that you can be humble and that you're all the things that a professional NFL quarterback needs to be. then those GMs can go to bat for you if they really like your tape and if they like your skill set. And then maybe you're not a day 3 pick. Maybe you are taking him round 2. You know, Chris, maybe he's not a top 5 pick, but maybe he's not getting beaten out for a job by Dylan Gabriel. Like Dylan Gabriel's not being drafted to the same team you did 2 rounds earlier.
I heard that Shedeur Sanders called Tim Couch to ask for number 2, and he said no. Can't wear number 2.
Awesome. Amazing. I look at this and I say, okay, and again, I learned things against my own will. I learned things about the pre-draft process that we as fans, when we're doing mock drafts, are not privy to. And so I found that incredibly interesting. Like if you look at some of the point totals that added to people's scores, Chris, the people are listening to this on audio only. 123 points got added to Daniel Jeremiah's overall score.
Sherline, Traeger, and Solek, too.
Yeah. His score without Sanders, like with Sanders taken into account, was 305. If you removed Shedeur Sanders from the equation, his score drops to 182. I had to segment it because that's crazy. That's a whole extra, almost a whole extra first round's worth of players drafted because you made one mistake. And so in that way, this like kind of picking through the wreckage of that helps understand how maybe these pundits across the board nationally need to pay more attention to some of that stuff, some of the back channeling. Maybe they need to check with their sources. We know they all have them, and find out how are NFL GMs actually viewing these guys. Get some information on how you think that's going to fare, because clearly nobody knew enough except for GMs, because 32 teams said no 4 times to Shedeur Sanders. Nobody could have prognosticated that, at least not with the information that was available. Also, like, what I'll say is this. Do you remember when Mel Kiper coined the phrase stats are for losers? Mm-hmm. He was talking about the Bills' Josh Allen. Everyone in the world said he would be a terrible pick, except for Mel Kiper. Mel Kiper was one of the few fans of Josh Allen out there. I understand the people who want to make like the correlation and say, well, Mel Kiper thinks he's good and Mel Kiper trusted in Josh Allen. But didn't you just say Mel Kiper also loved Jimmy Clausen?
Yeah.
It's okay to be wrong. You just can't be like almost offensively wrong. And he's shown he can do that in the past. So you can't paint with that brush, I don't think, when it comes to this. And if I will say, I give Mel Kiper credit for at least, Chris, because I'm an idiot. I die on a lot of hills. He picked this as his hill to die on. And if it turns out he's right, and Shedeur Sanders goes on to be a really good NFL pro quarterback, like Tom Brady, he's going to make a lot of people look stupid. Like Josh Allen, who watched a team trade up ahead of the Bills and then not take a quarterback. Watched a team draft a running back and then take Daniel Jones and not only draft him, but give him a contract extension when you could have just had a league MVP talent on your roster. It's going to make a lot of people look dumb. And Mel Kiper will be able to take his victory lap, and that will mean something when you talk about mock draft and prognostication. He'll feel vindicated. Like he might be the only one of these people who can actually say it, because he put his professional reputation on the line with the way he handled the draft coverage on the Shedeur Sanders thing. So it's the biggest mock draft crash out of all time. Mel Kiper is staking something personally on now the success of Shedeur Sanders. And he'll get to take the biggest victory lap ever because he put it out there that he's willing to go down with the ship, and he thinks everybody's an idiot for not drafting him. Do you know how many people who did mock drafts who took Shedeur Sanders and he didn't get drafted in the first round had that same visceral reaction?
Everyone?
No. In defense of Shedeur Sanders? Nobody. So I'll give it to Mel, but also the rest of you were just wrong, and that's okay. Just understand, you're not willing to put your name on it, then you can't claim it. You can't claim it, you know? There's also some other dynamics that I thought were really interesting. Like I said earlier, no one missed in the top 3 picks. So everybody knew that the top 3 picks were going to go Cam Ward, Travis Hunter, and Abdul Carter. And an offensive tackle at 4. The only variance that took place with the 4th pick, Chris Collins, Brett Coleman. The 4th pick was just because they had a different tackle. They thought that the guy, Membu, who went to the Jets, would be the guy taken. But everybody knew philosophically who was taking who. And it's funny that even when, and that's why I love this exercise, because even when you see the trade up by Jacksonville to number 2, the pick didn't change. It was still Travis Hunter because he was the second best player in the draft. And that's why this exercise is fun, because it helps kind of dial in, like, how many of you are attuned to actual skill sets, overall talent, but then also what NFL GMs think about it. You know, I love remember the conversation about how Will Campbell's short arms were supposed to be a problem?
Yes.
Oh, it's a problem. They said it during he had a hilarious thing where he was like, he's like, I've played for years at LSU. No one's brought up my short arms until now at the combine. And the people he's like, the only people talking about it aren't people who get to make football decisions. And that's for good reason. Which is a hilarious thing to say at the combine when football people are there, but also the media's there. Because he's basically telling, like, GMs and coaches, like, look, I don't give a shit what these guys think. I'm a football player. Just come talk to me. And I love the idea that that's the way it went. His draft stock was unchanged by his arm length. Why? Because that's a thing that pundits care about and guys who grade football don't. And so he went where I think everyone assumed months ago prior to the combine that he would. No variance in those top 4. And I like that concept. But then you look at the idea of, like, other picks that people were wrong about, the most significantly wrong about, and why. And so, guys, it's funny. I'm actually going to make this available in, like, Google Docs. If anybody wants to see the table itself and see the work I put in, because I have notes. Anytime somebody had a double-digit point total, I listed the player who it was and where they ultimately were drafted. One, for my own tracking purposes, but also because I can look back at this next year when I come back to make fun of people, and I can see, how did this, like, Will Johnson was a player, Chris, who really devastated people's scores. Like, there was more so than in any year that we've done this before, ever, and more than I can remember. This draft had a ton of variance. If you look at the numbers, Chris, look how many single digits there are right up until about pick 15.
Yeah, I was actually trying to count, like, after the first 4, who got the most correct in it. I see Jordan Reed got the first 7 picks correct.
Yep.
But then you have, like, Schrager got pick 10, 12, 18, and 23 correct.
Yep.
Which is interesting. Like, that's what I'm going to pay attention to in an exercise like this, is, like, what did you get right, like, picks 10 to 32? That's what I'm interested in. Shout out Jordan Reed for getting fucking 7 in a row correct.
Well, and here's the best. If you average out between pick 1 and pick 15, and that's where this exercise really gets interesting for me. Between pick 1 and 14, the average was 3 points. 3 points to your total added on average if you take Shadur Sanders out of the equation. Total was 110. If you take what happened next under the same thing of we're going to exclude Shadur Sanders' point total from everybody else, the average jumped up to 10.8, 11. So you went from, and Chris, isn't that what this draft was supposed to be? And so what you learn is, in a year when you hear people talking about how, oh man, there's not a ton of star power in this draft. There's just a really big middle. It's the Wild West as far as who values what where. And so we should have kind of expected that there would be a lot of variance between what fans thought was going to be important and what would actually take place through that back half of the first round. And that's exactly how it played out. Like I said, 1,521 total points by comparison to I think less than half of that in the first half. So what that tells you is that as pundits, you can get it right to a certain degree. And as soon as the depth of the class starts to fail you, everybody's fucking wrong. These are people who get paid to study the draft, and they can't do it. So what gives you as a casual fan the hubris to think that you can do it and then argue with some other shirtless idiot on the internet? What I love is that not only like there was two players that I have color coded here on this chart that really stuck out to me for different reasons. Both of them edge rushers. Donovan Ezeraku and Mike Green were the two other most damaging players to every pundit's score when it came to their mock draft. And Mike Green obviously fell the farthest, and Donovan Ezeraku, who fell a little bit farther into the second round, and for different reasons. You know, people kept talking about it. Like I even saw it on Twitter in the run up to the first pick for the Bills. They were like, oh boy, here we go. Ezeraku's there. He's going to be the pick, and I hate this. And then they went cornerback instead. I think what happened after talking to some people involved, like I talked to Brett Coleman and EJ Snyder from over at Bootleg. I go, guys, let me bounce this idea off you. And they agreed with me that they think I'm correct. Donovan Ezeraku got taken in 6 out of the 8 drafts we looked at in the first round. And that's because they were looking at the team, Chris, and saying, well, this team needs an edge rusher. And because we think that there's going to be a run on that, obviously he's going to have to go here to this team. Or he's going to, you know, I think the earliest he was seen picked is like pick 15. But the reality is every team that needed defensive line upgrades in the first round, like the teams that weren't after a Shamar Stewart, right? Like the Bengals, who just took a flyer on a freak athlete. If you weren't getting a guy who was viewed as a blue chipper, teams started to go D-tackle. And so the teams that he was prognosticated towards, it would have been the Bills. It would have been the Lions. It would have been a team that you knew needed some juice on the line. They chose to prioritize D tackles over edge rush. And in that way, that pushed him down into the second round. And so then the next wave of guys who said, hey, we need offensive linemen, and we took them at the top of the draft. Now he's available. Now he's there for those teams to say, okay, I addressed offense, let's pivot back and take a defender. So Donovan Ezeraku was more a victim of circumstance than his overall talent. I think everybody agreed he was a talented player, which is why he went in the middle of the first half of the second round, if I'm correct. Chris, what pick? In fact, let me hover over this. It'll tell me. Pick 44. So top half of the second round. It was one of the teams that went offense, or that maybe not even went offense, but just understood like, hey, I took a gamble at a different position. Now I have to fill this one. Then you look at the Mike Green situation, and the reason that's important, Chris, is because that's something that you as a fan, you have no idea. Like, you don't realize that a GM might say, hey, I'm Brandon Beane, and as much as I might want an edge rusher, you know what I need as a cornerback? I'll prioritize a guy who might be CB3 or CB4 or CB5, like Maxwell Hairston was in a lot of people's eyes. I'll take that guy before everybody else's edge 7. Why? Because I don't give a shit. I know what I need. And this is actually how I stacked my big board. In fact, in the case of Brandon Beane, he put Maxwell Hairston over every single defensive back that we as fans thought the Bills might be interested in.
Trey Amos.
When Jahdae Barron went, we talked about it in the show. I thought that there was a shoe-in for Trey Amos. And instead, it was, then I'm like, oh, maybe Ravel, because they've got these things that they can lean on veterans until he's healthy and they can let him kind of slowly ramp up. And instead, they went with like an option that I think we all in the pre-draft process demoted down that chain for varying reasons that are all obviously wrong, because we don't know what Brandon Beane wants. And this should be a referendum on that. Mike Green is the really interesting one. Again, one of the most damaging picks, because he went pick 59, and every single person who put him in the first round basically took themselves immediately out of the running to win this exercise. And I guess the idea is we as fans are looking at the talent. So we see the talent, we see the tape, even the guys who quote unquote grind the tape said he's got first round talent. I floated this by Bruce Nolan and he actually applauded me because he was like, look at you trying to get smarter about things. And he agreed that he agreed with my premise here. That's why, like I said, I like when I have these ideas and I can bounce them off smart people and they go, no, you're probably spot on about that. We as fans and we as the community who consumes draft content can look at a player and go, well, we know he's got some off the field stuff, but look at this talent. He led, he had 11 and a half sacks, I think it was, and he was this and that. He's Jerry Hughes in his prime 2.0. It's all of these things. The one thing that we don't take into consideration, and obviously neither does the national media who does this for a living, NFL GMs also have access to NFL security personnel. NFL security personnel is a weird job to have, right, Chris? Like, you go, what does that mean?
I'll take it. Probably pays real nice. I'm available.
These guys don't just, like, it's not just like, hey, we stand outside of a box and watch doors. They also file Freedom of Information Act requests, FOIA. It's a thing. They file FOIA requests. They do digging. They, in some cases, depending on how much they're being paid, almost act as private investigators on behalf of an NFL franchise. Every GM has a team of these guys. In fact, a part of me questions sometimes if they're not league installations and it's just almost like a hub that GMs utilize, or if every team really does have its own version of RIP from Yellowstone. I'd prefer to believe the latter because that's awesome. I'd like to believe that Brandon Beane has a guy who will go put a guy's head in a microwave if he really needs it done. But their job is to drum up information about extenuating circumstances. So when you see the Buffalo Bills draft Maxwell Hairston, and there's some allegations that exist out there, and I'm not going to tell anybody they're wrong for having emotions or feelings about that. What I'm going to say is these guys try to do the best job that they can in sussing these things out. Now, the Matt Araiza situation is a really good example of this. NFL Security Council comes back and NFL Security comes back and tells Brandon Beane, we don't have anything on this. It seems like we're still trying to determine whether there's fire where there's smoke, and we don't know if this guy's involved at this point, so we can't really tell you anything because the situation's still materializing. Brandon Beane has a very direct conversation with the individual and gets an answer, and then later finds out that the answer that was given to him by that individual is wrong. So he's forced to now rely just on firsthand information from this person. And when he's wrong, he cuts the guy, not even so much, I saw there was pushback about the idea that, oh, you didn't give him an opportunity and he didn't get, right to due process, I guess. And I guess the thing would be Brandon Beane is kind of showing us with this selection that he's willing to take chances on guys who maybe have some things going on, but he's had the time to suss them out. But at the same time, you're on a very short leash in terms of what he does and doesn't know. I don't think a guy who's been kind of publicly embarrassed the way that they were as a franchise about this Araiza situation and the reaction that they had to take afterwards and the position that put them in, I don't think he would willingly wade into those waters again unless he had his eyes wide open on the matter. But he would get that information from NFL security. And you know who doesn't have access to that, Chris?
Larry Ogunjobi.
Brett Coleman.
Oh.
When he says that he's going to go, 16th or 19th?
Yep.
Or, Jordan Reed from ESPN, when he has him mocked to go 17th. And because what that is saying is we understand what the ethos of the NFL is. This guy may have done some pretty horrific shit. But we also know that it's a performance-based league. And some GM out there is probably going to lean on, hey, he's a really talented player. And if I think he's not going to make a mistake again, it might be a huge advantage for me to be one of the 32 who decides to pull the trigger. So everyone was shocked, right? Because we knew he had this off-field stuff, but you assumed some GM would be hungry or desperate enough to pull the trigger. So the fact that he fell as far as he did, all the way down to pick 59, tells you that it really took and I do think it's hilarious that it's the Ravens, right? After they kind of beat their chest about, I'm really happy that we have a zero tolerance policy for this this kind of thing, when they were trying to dunk on the Browns over Deshaun Watson's situation. But what that tells you is that what we know about the situation pales in comparison to what was able to be found by people who work with these GMs. The information they were able to get their hands on that pundits don't have, that we as the NFL absorbing community don't have, it's pretty significant. And so he got kicked down the ladder until some team that was real desperate for a pass rusher said, fine, I'll be the bad guy. I'll be the bad guy who takes the bait here and drafts a guy, even knowing what other GMs know, and decided, no, we're not gambling on this. So that information is something we will never have. And so to try to mock draft around that, it's almost hubris, right, Chris?
Yeah.
We're only dealing with 2/3 of the information that's going into these draft picks. And then you factor in, Chris, how much more do they know about guys with health issues that we never find out about? Will Johnson's a great example. He's another one of these players who on my, throughout the scoring here, there's a number of people who had him going as a first round pick. If I look at this, I can find him. Jalen Milroe was one for Chris Collinsworth. And I think that's defendable just because he thought there was going to be a run on quarterbacks. But that gave him 71 extra points to his score. If I go through, though, and I try to find someone had Trey Amos, 30, Jordan Reed from ESPN. He went 31 picks later with pick 61. Okay. When you go through and you start looking at where everybody went, Will Johnson went 47, but Benjamin Solak said he would go with what is this? That's the 21st pick in the draft. It's because you've seen what you saw on tape, but you don't have those medical reports. You have no idea that he's going to have a degenerative knee thing that scares teams so badly that every team in the first round says, we know he has star talent. We just don't care. We're not spending a draft pick that might have his career cut short in 2 to 3 years. That gets underestimated, but that's because we as the community, them as the pundits, they don't have the medical records that these GMs can get. They're not there at the combine. What you're hearing is third or fourth hand information by the time it makes it to the media. Oh, Will Johnson's got a knee problem. That information has already been filtered through about 3 different layers of people before it's ever allowed to become public. And this is proof positive of that. So, Chris, even though I set out here tonight to kind of make fun of everybody associated with this, it is interesting to see the reasons why they're wrong and where they're most wrong and what drove it. So with that said, it's all over but the crying and the anointing of trophies. And so with that, I want to start off with the toilet bowl. And the toilet bowl award goes to our friend, Brett Coleman. From Bootleg Football. I did warn him of this. Chris will have a graphic on screen in support of this, just so you can all see it if you're watching on YouTube. For a guy who didn't take Shedeur Sanders in the first round, I don't think he could have done worse. Scoring 393 points. Nobody else, there was close, right? Like Jordan Reed finished with Sanders at 386. The problem is, without Sanders, Jordan Reed finished at 251, and there was Brett Coleman just holding his ass cheeks at 393. Almost into Doug Farrar territory. But that makes sense if you think about some of the dynamics we just got done describing. Because if you know Brett Coleman and you pay attention to Bootleg Football, he's a guy who spends a lot of time grinding the tape. He spends a lot of time going to the East-West Shrine Bowl and the Senior Bowl.
Combine.
The Combine. He's there. He's talking to these guys. He's watching their film. He's been to scout school. He understands what he's seeing and has a high level understanding of these prospects. And the problem is you can become too close to the subject matter without understanding these outlying things that we just laid out. And so in that way, you set yourself up to do worse because you fall in love with certain talents. Like here, to the Bills, he thought we were going to take Prince Umanominelli. It doesn't matter, not going to matter because he went with the 77th pick. But he had the Bills taking a defensive tackle, not named TJ Sanders, even though we know he was probably, they missed out on the guy that the Lions drafted. So he would have been their next choice. He had Darius Alexander pegged to the 28th pick. Nick Scorton from Texas A&M, a defensive end who ended up going pick 51, way down in the second round. He had him pegged as a first round pick and ahead of where the Bills would have been able to get him. But this is because he's watched his tape and thinks he understands how he projects to the NFL. Now, I'm not going to say he's wrong. And that's the beauty of this type of thing. Doing the studying on this, on the prospects, maybe these guys do go on to be stars. And maybe teams like the Bills regret, maybe there's a world where I look at some of these guys who, whoever had the 23rd pick, maybe they regret passing on Will Johnson. Tet McMillan, he had Tet McMillan going all the way down in the pick 24. So maybe there's a world where the Carolina Panthers regret that and they go, man, we could have taken a different wide receiver. We could have waited. We could have traded back and got better value because McMillan he ends up performing like a player who should have been drafted later in the first round. Or maybe we could have gotten more assets and traded back, gotten better value for our pick if he just ends up being a middling talent. That's the beauty of the scouting process versus mock drafts. Scouting process, it'll go on forever, at least for however long these players' careers are and until the next crop of players comes out. But mock drafts just float around. Like they're finite. They're here. They're in the now based on half-assed information. And with that said, like Brett Coleman did the worst. Now I will throw in the caveat. If you count Shedeur Sanders, Chris Collinsworth was a close second, Chris, and I think we have to acknowledge that because don't we already hate Chris Collinsworth?
Yeah.
There's no more punchable broadcaster on earth. His score was higher than anything Doug Farrar ever put up with a 498. I've never seen anyone come close to 500. Never during this exercise. Further proof that Chris Collinsworth is a horse's ass. The winner, Chris. Drum roll. Lance Zierlein from NFL Network. Kind of anticlimactic that one of the guys who gets paid by the NFL itself to be a part of their media arm is the guy who had the best mock drafting with the least amount of variance. And just to underscore how much better Lance Zierlein did than everybody else, Chris, in terms of players that had a double-digit impact on their score, in the first 22 picks, Lance Zierlein only had one. And that was because he took Omarion Hampton at 12. He had him pegged at 12. And he went at 22. That's crazy.
He did pretty good.
That's a guy who's in tune with not just the behind-the-scenes messaging, but also kind of in tune with, hey, I've seen the tape. You go to NFLnetwork.com. You could Google, Chris. In fact, as an exercise, try it right now. If you Google Cody Ford NFL draft profile, I bet you the first thing that pops up is the profile from NFL.com, right there at the top. SEO optimization, baby. And guess who wrote that?
Doug Farrar.
No.
Oh, Lance Zierlein?
Lance Zierlein. So the guy who does the most actual scouting and analysis player by player on behalf of the NFL itself, and who also probably has access to some other things some of these other guys don't, it makes sense that he would have the best score. And I think that just reinforces everything we talked about here tonight. So if there's anything I want you guys to take away from this, Lance Zierlein rules at mock drafts. Brett Coleman had a real bad year in terms of prognosticating where guys would go. And for the rest of you You're all the real losers in this. The people who are doing your own half-baked, home-cooked mock drafts and then going out and trying to assert that, well, based on this thing I read and whatever, you're only getting these guys scraps. And I think we just proved that some of them just aren't good at this. So with that in mind, please, for the love of God, next year, and I know you won't, but I'm going to ask anyway, can you please not be so insufferable about the value of, well, I did a mock draft last night, and what, or even worse, take to Twitter when Kenneth Grant gets drafted by the Miami Dolphins at defensive tackle at 15 and go, oh my God, I did a mock draft where he was available at 30. That's a reach. Shut up. Can it? Understand that you know nothing. None of us do. If they don't, like if these guys that we talked about tonight know nothing, we know less. Take that. Just keep it in mind the next time you're about to tweet something and hit send. Just think about it for a second, please. Do me that one just favor. This sucks. Now I got to send it. I'm going to send Lance Zierlein one of the most uncomfortable DMs ever and be like, hey, you won mocking the mocks. And he's going to be like, what the He'll see it in like 5 days and go, what the fuck? And I'm going to tweet him a photo of just his face next to a trophy on a slide. He'll be like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Guys, this has been fun. And I'm happy that we got together to do this. It's going to become a staple of this going forward as I just start to hate everything and everyone more and more as I get older. But for tonight, we got to get out of here. I'm Drew Gear. That's Chris Kruger. And this has been Mocking the Mocks.